And then my first real day of work, I was ready to make what they call your maiden speech. A speech where you thank everyone who brought you to where you are, where you talk about who you are, where you come from, and what you stand for. And it turns out I didn't get to do that on the first day. Because on the very first day, the government became the first government in Alberta history to knowingly pass a law that they knew was unconstitutional. And we were there until 2 a.m. And I ended up giving an hour-long speech on just how wrong it was to underfund public education, to hurt students, parents, and teachers, and to take away people's human rights. That's how I started. My very first day, we were there until 2 a.m. And over the course of the last 6 weeks, it's been really interesting to have a front row seat, literally, on a government that is disintegrating, that doesn't even know what it stands for anymore, that doesn't even know who it is anymore, and that is lashing out at every critic, that is arguing against institutions, against judges, against teachers, against doctors, against frontline workers, certainly against the opposition, and against everyday Albertans who dare to criticize them. So the government House Leader said he doesn't care about what's going on outside the Dome, he's only focused on what's happening inside the legislature, which is such a crazily bizarre thing to say, because we're here to serve people, and the people don't live in the legislature. We have to pay attention to what's going on in our home ridings, outside in the community, in the constituencies, because that's who we serve. And that the question that you asked really got me thinking about one thing, which is the Premier has often said during this session, parliamentarians are supreme, legislatures are supreme, legislators make the decision. And it's really been bothering me, and I finally put my thumb on why. It's because, of course, parliamentarians aren't supreme. Albertans are supreme. The people who elected us are supreme. We serve the citizens. And this government has it all backwards. They think that the legislature, the Constitution, judges, independent officers of the legislature exist to serve the government. And I believe the government exists to serve the people. So on the energy sector, for example, we put forth a bill that no one really followed because it was so technical about the need for energy storage on the electricity grid. It sounds really, really technical, but it talks about the things you need to put in place to create a greener electricity grid and bring people's energy costs down, their electricity utility bills every month. And so we're really trying to give people a sense that we know what we're doing, we're not scared of the details, but also that we share Albertans' values and Albertans' priorities. I'm not the kind of guy who is going to unroll an entire election platform 2 years before the election, but certainly that's where we're at, and that's what we're working on with Albertans. And so what I believe is that our Constitution, which guarantees people certain rights, provides a box in which you have to govern. And you have to figure out a way to have great policy within that box. So an Alberta New Democrat government will never use the notwithstanding clause, and we will introduce legislation similar to what Premier Canoe has done in Manitoba, making it extremely difficult to use the notwithstanding clause in a flip way like we've seen this government do. Should we form government, inshallah, as I always say, we're going to repeal a bunch of things. We're basically going to let Albertans breathe again and get out from all these restrictive things that the government has done. Sometimes I say bill number 1 in our government will be called the Take Back Alberta Act, which is a bit cheeky, but it really is about returning Alberta to Albertans and getting rid of all these restrictions on people's freedoms that this government has put in. And that means repealing all the uses of the notwithstanding clause. That's really important. And on the teachers, the really important thing to understand here is there was a whole suite of options the government could have taken before going to the notwithstanding clause. And it was very puzzling that they did what they did. Because the first thing you could have done was actually spend the summer negotiating a deal with teachers, actually listening to them and saying, we believe that your concerns about class size and complexity are real. But the government never talked about class sizes or complexity until the teachers were already on strike. They could have used provisions they have under the Labor Relations Code to get the teachers back to work without even going to the legislature. They could have used other provisions to send it away to a dispute interest board or an arbitrator or a mediator, and they didn't do any of that. And at the very end, they said, well, we'll ask the teachers, would you agree to go to a mediator if we don't talk about any of the issues you care about? Of course the teachers were going to say no. They presented the teachers in the fall with the exact same deal that they had rejected in the spring. Of course they were going to say no. What did you think was going to happen? And even if they wanted to legislate the teachers back to work, they could have done it, as many governments have done, without using the notwithstanding clause, which basically means that, or they could have forced it to arbitration at that time. And that basically means that there probably would have been a court case, and some months or some years from now, a court would have ruled on whether you should have done that or not. They didn't do any of that. They went straight to the notwithstanding clause, straight to the nuclear option. And we finally know why. The Minister of Infrastructure said the quiet part out loud, and the Minister of Education agreed with them. They were never planning on making a deal with the teachers. They didn't want to spend the money. We have the lowest funded public education system in the country, and they wanted to keep it that way. So they used the notwithstanding clause because they were never willing to make a fair deal. That is illegal, it is unconstitutional, and it is unethical. And had Albertans known that this was a government that was committed to defunding public education, the results of that election would have been different. Well, you know, and it is true, there's a lot of polling going on. Some of it's public, some of it's not. And the momentum is absolutely on our side. You know, if an election were held today, we would win. But an election is not being held today. There's a lot of campaigning to do, and we don't control the timing of that election. But what we do control is our ability to speak with Albertans, and our ability to continue to tell Albertans what an Alberta New Democrat government would look like and how it is in tune with their values. So I'm just going to keep doing that. And different Albertans are interested in different things. You know, political nerds like me are incredibly alarmed at the anti-democratic authoritarian bent of this government. But they're doing it on purpose because they think citizens don't care about that. That citizens think that if their government is fighting against people they don't like, be it immigrants, be it trans kids, whatever, the various targets this government has taken on, that they'll be angry enough to keep voting for them. And I fundamentally believe people need to see results, but they also need to see a government that respects them, that respects their human rights, that respects the institutions that have built this democracy. And we're going to keep fighting for that. We will be not just the best opposition you've ever seen, but we're going to be the best government in waiting you've ever seen. And you will get excited and enthused about what is possible in Alberta, because we will be a government that doesn't pit Albertans against one another. We will be a government that focuses on big, audacious dreams of making this and keeping this as the best place in the world.